Many of those who had such injuries did not even go to the hospital. They removed the shrapnel from their bodies themselves. Even on New Year's night, the Russians could not help themselves. That's who they are. Russia has sharply criticized Western countries for what it calls a lack of reaction to a New Year's Eve attack in the Kherson region, claiming this silence exposes double standards over civilian casualties. Moscow has described the muted response as a sign of complicity in the bloody crimes of what it labels neo-Nazis in Kyiv, using highly charged rhetoric to condemn Ukraine and its backers. Russia's ambassador to the UN in Geneva issued a formal statement denouncing Western governments over the incident, a message widely amplified by state media, including RT. Gennady Gatilov said, quote, "We resolutely condemn this outrageous act of barbarity by Zelensky and his clique, who have long since transformed into bloodthirsty monsters. The main goal of this regime is to cling to power by any means, distract attention from the failures of the Ukrainian armed forces and disrupt any attempts to find a peaceful resolution to the conflict. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Türk, and relevant UN agencies must publicly condemn the attack without delay. Remaining silent would be equivalent to open complicity and involvement in the bloody crimes of neo-Nazis." Unquote. According to Russian authorities, Ukraine allegedly carried out a deadly drone strike targeting civilians who had gathered to celebrate New Year's Eve in Russian-controlled territory. Officials say multiple Ukrainian drones struck the village of Khorly, in the Russian-occupied part of Kherson region, shortly before midnight on December 31st. Russian regional and federal officials reported that at least 24 people were killed and more than 50 others wounded in the attack, including women and children. Later, the Russian-appointed governor of Kherson region gave grim details of the aftermath, describing bodies on the ground, emergency crews working through the night, and urgent efforts to evacuate the wounded. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has so far not publicly acknowledged or accepted Russia's accusations over Khorly, with Kyiv typically dismissing such claims as propaganda. On January 1st, Zelensky instead condemned Russia for launching its own attacks on Ukraine during New Year's night, accusing Moscow of using the holiday period to terrorize civilians. This was a regular cafe where people gathered for the New Year's celebration. There were more than 100 people there. If we take the people who survived, they naturally have documents. These were middle-aged people. There were many young people around 20 to 25 years old. They were also injured. Many of those who had such injuries did not even go to the hospital. They removed the shrapnel from their bodies themselves. There were people on the scene who immediately rushed to help, but the enemy continued to threaten them and did not allow them to do so. Reconnaissance drones were hovering overhead, preventing people from approaching to help those who were still there, even though the fire was so intense that it was already impossible to enter. These were different people. They were probably visiting someone. This is southern Russia, a warm region, so they came to visit their relatives and brought their children to have fun near the festive tree. Everyone who was there had nothing to do with military professions. By the way, the cafe's owner also suffered serious shrapnel wounds that penetrated her chest cavity. Fortunately, she survived. There were burnt people. It's clear that this impact was not only from the fire of building constructions but also from the incendiary ammunition that followed the shrapnel, hitting those who were there. This was a regular cafe, essentially in a small resort village near a hotel. All the people who were there gathered shortly before midnight. Apparently, during our President Vladimir Putin's speech, such a terrorist act was committed. It was precisely the time chosen when the whole world, those who celebrate New Year at midnight our time, congratulate each other and listen to the greetings. It was at this time that the attack was made to relax vigilance and somehow bypass observational posts. From the Black Sea side, these drones evidently approached and inflicted the strike in this way. They were probably hovering in the air for a long time, and struck exactly about 5 minutes before the New Year. The biggest problem that arose there was that people who were nearby and standing outside, fortunately, were not inside at the time but were heading into the cafe. They immediately rushed to help, but following the first and second, a third drone arrived. In the first minutes, those who were nearby were providing assistance. The Emergency Situations Ministry arrived at the scene immediately, within 20 to 30 minutes, but the fire was so intense that it was extinguished nearly until dawn. It was poorly visible at night, and only in the morning could one enter the territory. What we see now in the footage. This work is no longer for rescuers, but for investigators and identifiers of what happened there. But overall, the Emergency Situations Ministry and Special Forces that arrived there acted quite promptly. For this, they deserve great thanks, because if they hadn't started extinguishing the fire and evacuating those inside in time, it might have been much more complicated. After the fire, which lasted more than 6 hours, was put out and it became possible to enter the ruins of the café and partially the hotel, the investigative committee began working on identifying the remaining charred bodies and examining the situation regarding how and with what kind of ammunition a civilian facility was attacked, which has absolutely no connection to military or any related spheres. There is now talk that apparently there were military people there, but if children and those children who are now among the victims are considered military. Now Crimea has begun to help us because severely injured people are being transported to the Crimean Clinical Hospital. Among them are children and teenagers born in 2008 to 2007. It was an ordinary festive evening. The adversary is simply trying to disrupt the peaceful life of civilians and show that peace is still a long way off. They are clearly acting against the efforts of our president and US President, Donald Trump, who say and do everything to bring about a peace agreement. But it seems the Kyiv regime doesn't want this, thus showing its beastly face. No matter what they do, the Russian soldier and the Russian engineer, who is now countering such attacks, cannot be defeated. Therefore, no matter how much Ukrainian forces are helped, the goals of the special military operation will be achieved. Such strikes against civilians, cruel, brutal, and bloody, further fuel the resolve of our warriors in their actions, which will stop such state-level terrorism. It is unclear why Western leaders are silent about this or refuse to see it. They are probably looking at something else. That which can gouge the eye, they are perhaps afraid to look at.
Шановні українці, українки, ще раз з Новим роком усіх. Починаємо цей рік, починаємо дипломатію, продовжуємо розмову з нашими партнерами. Це найголовніше, щоб підтримка для нас, для України була. І була достатня. Саме на цьому все тримається, передусім воїни на передовій, всі наші захисники і захисниці, наша промисловість, наше виробництво зброї. Кожен, хто нам допомагає, вся наша міжнародна підтримка. ППО треба шукати кожен день, ракети для ППО Україні потрібні щодня. І так само фінанси на зброю, на дрони для нашої армії, НРК, техніку, все необхідно. Все максимально активно, так само заради того, щоб перемовини рухались, в усіх аспектах рухались, на кожному треку. І сьогодні Рустем Умєров на зустрічах в Туреччині. Міністр закордонних справ Туреччини, далі розвідка, і ми дуже стараємось у новому році відновити обміни. Саме це ключова тема в розмові з Туреччиною. Нам потрібне це сприяння, щоб повертати наших українців додому з російського полону. В минулому році обміни були активними, під кінець року, на жаль, загальмували, треба тепер відновити. Також Рустем кожного дня на зв'язку з американською командою та нашими партнерами в Європі. Вчора, сьогодні ми готуємо формат, ми готуємо важливі зустрічі. 3 січня – зустріч радників з питань національної безпеки в Україні. Це перша така зустріч в Україні щодо миру. Європейські представники, плюс ми очікуємо американську команду онлайн. І 15 країн підтвердили, плюс представники європейських структур і НАТО. Далі, 5 січня буде зустріч військових, начальники генеральних штабів зустрінуться. Головне – це гарантії безпеки для України. Політично майже все готово і важливо опрацювати кожну деталь, як гарантії працюватимуть в небі, на землі, на морі. Якщо нам вдасться закінчити війну. А саме це ключова мета для всіх нормальних людей. 6 січня – зустріч на рівні лідерів європейських країн, лідери, коаліція охочих. Ми готуємо зараз, щоб зустріч була продуктивною, і щоб підтримки стало більше, і щоб по гарантіях і по мирній угоді політичної впевненості стало більше. Дякуємо всім, хто нам допомагає. Зараз я говорив з президентом Кіпру. Перший дзвінок року. Саме з 1 січня починається головування Кіпру в Євросоюзі. Для нас важливо, щоб Україна була в пріоритетах кіпрського головування на півроку. Членство України в Євросоюзі – це так само гарантії безпеки. На членство теж ми працюємо. Поінформував про нашу розмову з Америкою, про ситуацію в дипломатії. Дякую Кіпру за підтримку. Дякую, пане президенте Нікосе, за всі важливі слова про українців, про Україну, про нашу силу. Звісно, дякую кожному, хто сьогодні від ночі, від ранку працює на відновлення після російських ударів. Навіть в новорічну ніч росіяни не стримались. Ось такі вони. Але ми захищаємось та відновлюємо. Такі українці. А завтра буде важливий день внутрішньої політики для України. Слава Україні!